A case like this one does not move in straight lines. It loops back on itself. It revisits places already searched, examines materials already collected, and sometimes finds what was missed the first time. The Nancy Guthrie investigation is now in one of those loops. And what investigators found when they went back may be the detail that finally breaks it open. Hair. Recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's Tucson home, described by sources as potentially critical evidence, now sitting in an FBI laboratory, undergoing the kind of analysis that can, in the right circumstances, tell investigators exactly who they are looking for. Not approximately, not probably, exactly. Nancy Guthrie vanished in early February from her home in Tucson, Arizona. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie. The case was classified as an abduction from the beginning, and that classification shaped every decision that followed. A ransom note recovered shortly after the disappearance confirmed that framing and set the direction of the investigation. More than 10 weeks later, a second ransom note has entered the picture, and the FBI is working with physical evidence from inside her home that did not previously exist in the public record of this case. Day 75. That is where this investigation stands today. 75 days of work, and the answers, for now, are encoded in a strand of hair being processed under federal microscopes in a laboratory somewhere in this country. What that analysis actually involves, what it can and cannot produce, why it is taking the time it is taking, what the second ransom note tells investigators that the first one did not, and what comes next if the forensic work delivers a usable result. That is what this report covers in detail. Not speculation, not conjecture. The process as it actually functions, applied to what is actually known about this case. This is the kind of story that deserves the full picture. So that is what this report provides. To understand what the FBI is doing with the hair samples from Nancy Guthrie's home, it is worth taking the time to understand what forensic hair analysis actually involves at a substantive level and what it can realistically be expected to produce in an investigation of this kind. When investigators collect hair from a crime scene or from a person's residence, the first question is always whether the hair is suitable for DNA analysis. Hair analysis can take two fundamentally different forms depending on the physical characteristics of what has been collected. If a hair includes the root, meaning the follicular material that anchors it to the scalp, it contains nuclear DNA. Nuclear DNA is the same genetic material used in standard DNA profiling. It is specific to an individual in the same way that fingerprints are specific to an individual. And a full nuclear DNA profile can be used to identify a single person with a statistical confidence that is essentially absolute in legal terms. If a hair does not include the root, which is the case for hair that has been shed naturally rather than pulled or cut, investigators work with mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is found in the cell's energy-producing structures rather than in the nucleus, and it is inherited exclusively through the maternal line. Every person shares identical mitochondrial DNA with their biological mother, their mother's mother, and all maternal line relatives. Mitochondrial DNA analysis is a powerful investigative tool. It can definitively exclude individuals who do not share the same maternal lineage. It can narrow the field of possible contributors significantly. What it cannot do is distinguish between individuals within the same maternal family line. In the Nancy Guthrie case, the hair samples produce what sources described as mixed DNA results. A mixed result means the extracted material contained the genetic signatures of more than one individual. In a residential setting, this is an expected possibility. A home that has been lived in, that has received visitors, that has had maintenance workers or household help or family members move through it, will naturally contain the biological material of multiple people. Hair, in particular, sheds continuously and passively. It does not require any deliberate act to be deposited in a space. The presence of mixed profiles is not a sign of analytical failure or evidence contamination. It is a reflection of the physical reality of an interior living space. What it does create is a significant technical challenge. Resolving a mixed DNA profile requires a process called probabilistic genotyping. This is a computational statistical method that uses mathematical modeling to estimate the probability that specific individuals contributed to a given mixed sample. The process works by identifying all of the genetic markers present in the sample and then modeling every possible combination of individual profiles that could collectively produce that observed pattern of markers. For each possible combination, the probability that this specific mixture would result from those specific contributors is calculated. The result is a likelihood ratio that expresses how much more probable it is that a specific person contributed to the sample than that a random person from the population did. This process is sophisticated, it is computationally intensive, and it is time-consuming. The more contributors there potentially are in a sample, the more combinations must be modeled, and the longer the process takes. Courts in the United States, including federal courts, have accepted probabilistic genotyping results as scientifically valid and legally admissible evidence. The FBI's laboratory system uses state-of-the-art probabilistic genotyping software. But even state-of-the-art software cannot make a complex mixed profile simple. It can only make it solvable. The other requirement for probabilistic genotyping to produce a meaningful result is comparison samples. The mathematical modeling of a mixture is most useful when investigators have reference DNA from specific individuals who can be tested against the modeled profiles. Without comparison samples, the analysis can produce a deduced profile, but cannot link it to a named person. The collection of those comparison samples from persons of interest in the Guthrie case is something that investigators have almost certainly been pursuing. Whether they have collected samples from a specific suspect is information they are not sharing, and for good operational reasons. What the delay in the analysis means and what it does not mean is worth being explicit about. The delay means the process is complex and is being done correctly. It does not mean the evidence is compromised. It does not mean investigators are stalled. And it does not mean the result, when it arrives, will be less valuable than a result that came quickly from a simpler sample. A clean probabilistic genotyping result from a complex mixed profile, when it is achieved, is among the most scientifically defensible forms of forensic evidence available to law enforcement. The second ransom note in the Nancy Guthrie case deserves specific and sustained attention because its emergence changes what investigators know about the nature of this abduction in ways that are genuinely significant. When a ransom note is sent once, it establishes a frame, but does not confirm much about the nature of the situation behind it. A single communication might reflect an opportunistic abductor who acted impulsively and made a demand without a long-term plan. It might reflect a staged kidnapping, where the note is designed to misdirect investigators away from a different scenario entirely. It might reflect a genuine, planned criminal operation with a specific financial objective. A single note can be consistent with all of those possibilities. It is evidence of the frame. It is not yet evidence of the substance. A second note, sent weeks after the first, is different in kind, not just in degree. It tells investigators that the person who sent it made a deliberate decision to reach out again. That decision required planning. It required a continued willingness to engage with the risk that comes with any communication in an active federal investigation. And it required a sustained engagement with the situation rather than an abandonment of it. Those are not the characteristics of someone who acted impulsively and then walked away. Those are the characteristics of someone who is invested in the outcome and who believes the communication still serves their purpose. From an investigative standpoint, the second note does something critical that the first note alone could not do. It establishes a pattern. And patterns provide data. Investigators can compare the two notes for consistency and inconsistency. Do they share linguistic patterns? Are they produced with the same materials? Do they reflect the same level of sophistication? Do they escalate in urgency or tone? The comparison between two ransom communications is itself a form of evidence about the person who produced them. Ransom notes are also analyzed as forensic objects entirely separate from their content. the paper or material they are written on, the ink or toner used to produce them, the physical marks left by any instrument used in their creation. All of these carry information that forensic scientists can extract and analyze. If the note was printed from a specific printer, that printer can sometimes be identified through microscopic examination of the printed characters. If it was handwritten, pressure patterns and letter form analysis can be applied. If it was assembled from materials cut from other sources, those sources become part of the investigation. The phrasing of a ransom note also carries linguistic information that trained analysts can work with. Forensic linguistics is a specialized field that examines text for patterns of word choice, sentence construction, grammatical error patterns, idiomatic expressions, and structural choices that can collectively provide information about the educational background, regional origin, and native language of the author. In high-profile cases, forensic linguists are sometimes brought in specifically to analyze communications from suspects or unknown parties. Whether that level of analysis has been applied to the second Guthrie note is not something law enforcement has described publicly. What is known is that police took what they characterized as a major move in direct response to the note's emergence. That language implies action rather than passive intake. It implies that something in the note, whether its content, its physical characteristics, or the context of its delivery, gave investigators something concrete to act on. Officers also returned to Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood following the second note. Patrols were increased. This return to a familiar geography in direct response to a new communication suggests that the note contained information with geographic implications, that it pointed toward the neighborhood as a place of continued relevance, or that investigators received intelligence through other channels simultaneously with the note that directed them back to the area. The combination of a renewed investigative focus on the neighborhood and the ongoing DNA analysis being conducted by the FBI creates a picture of an investigation in which multiple threads may be converging. That convergence, if it is happening, is exactly what investigators work toward over the duration of a case. Different forms of evidence from different sources pointing in the same direction. When physical evidence, communication analysis, and witness information all indicate the same individual, the case for identification and prosecution becomes significantly stronger than any single form of evidence alone could support. There is a second story running alongside the forensic one in the Nancy Guthrie investigation, and it involves the people charged with bringing this case to a resolution. The Pima County Sheriff's Department is the local agency with jurisdiction over the case. It has been managing the public-facing elements of the investigation alongside federal investigators since the beginning. And in recent days, its conduct has become a part of the story in ways that draw attention away from the investigation itself and toward questions about the department's competence and its leadership. An alert was sent to the public this week that contained language no one following this case had been prepared for. The alert said that Nancy Guthrie had been located. The words were clear. They were unambiguous. They meant what they said in the most direct reading. She was found. For thousands of people who have been following this story over the past 10 weeks, who have kept it in their minds and hearts alongside whatever else is happening in their lives, those words produced a response that was immediate and emotional. That response was based on something that was not true. The alert was not accurate in the way those words universally communicate to a general audience. Whether the problem originated in how the message was drafted, in a failure of the review process that should have caught the discrepancy before distribution, or in a judgment error by whoever authorized the alert, the impact was the same. People experienced relief that had to be rescinded. And that rescission is its own kind of harm, more disorienting than sustained uncertainty, because it involves the specific psychological movement of resolving and then unresolving a situation that has been emotionally significant. The department has issued a correction. It has not issued an explanation. The difference between those two things matters in a case with this level of public attention and this level of sustained community investment. A correction says the previous statement was wrong. An explanation says how it got there, why the system failed to catch it, and what will be different going forward. The department has provided one of those two things, and the public is still waiting for the other. The separate criticism of the current sheriff, offered publicly by a former superior with claimed direct professional experience, added another dimension to the scrutiny. The former superior used language that points to personal character, vindictive, bully. These are not abstract policy criticisms. They are observations about how a person exercises authority made by someone who claims to have witnessed that authority in action. The department has not addressed those statements publicly. In the middle of an investigation of this profile and this duration, the absence of a response is something the public is noticing. Federal investigators are insulated from these local dynamics in important structural ways. The FBI does not take direction from a county sheriff's department. Its laboratory work proceeds according to federal scientific and evidentiary standards that operate independently of local credibility problems. That insulation is meaningful and important. But investigations are not entirely parallel processes operating in separate lanes. They require coordination, information sharing, and mutual operational support across agency lines. An environment of reduced trust and public credibility around the local agency makes that coordination harder to sustain effectively. And in a case where time carries its own weight, harder is a word that deserves to be taken seriously. If you are following this case in depth and want to continue with this level of analysis, please subscribe and you will not miss the next major development as it emerges. There is one more element to this case that has drawn attention this week, and it connects the investigation back to the human reality at its center, even as the forensic and investigative processes continue in institutional settings. Savannah Guthrie, known to a national audience through her sustained presence in morning television, was seen leaving her broadcast unexpectedly and mid-show this week. The departure was live, visible, and provided without any accompanying explanation. In the context of a case that her entire regular audience is aware of, it was impossible for viewers not to immediately reach for the significance of the moment. No statement was issued connecting the departure to the investigation. No statement was issued to rule out that connection. The silence that surrounded the exit became its own kind of communication, subject to interpretation by an audience that has been watching this story closely enough to understand what any unexplained departure might mean for a woman whose mother has been missing for 10 weeks. Speculation is not fact. But the speculation was immediate and widespread, which says something about the level of attention this case has sustained and the degree to which Savannah Guthrie's visible moments are being processed through the lens of her family's situation. A journalist who has been reporting closely on the Guthrie case made a public statement this week disclosing that there is a specific question he has been wanting to put directly to Savannah Guthrie, one he has not yet been able to ask. He did not identify the question. The disclosure was enough to signal that reporters with professional proximity to this investigation believe there is something in Savannah Guthrie's perspective or knowledge that the public has not yet accessed. Whether that belief is based on specific information the journalist has encountered in his reporting or on a more general sense that the family member closest to this story publicly has things to say that have not been said is impossible to determine from the outside. What is clear is that the family is navigating this case in public in ways that are exceptionally difficult. Every professional appearance that Savannah Guthrie makes is filtered through the knowledge that her mother is missing. Every unexplained departure becomes a signal. Every limited public comment about her mother's situation is itself notable precisely because of its limitation. There is no neutral behavior available to her at this point. Everything is read through the context of what the audience knows. Families in active investigations are typically advised by law enforcement to limit their public communications. There are good reasons for this. Public statements can reach suspects. They can influence witness accounts. They can affect operational decisions. Whether Savannah Guthrie is operating under specific guidance from investigators about what to say and when is not publicly known. But the pattern of her public engagement with this situation, careful and limited, is consistent with someone who is aware of the stakes of what she says. Looking at everything this case has produced in the past week, the picture is one of an investigation at a pivotal moment. The forensic evidence now being processed at the federal level is the most potentially significant development in the public record of this case since the initial classification as an abduction. The second ransom note confirms that the situation remains active. The return of police to the neighborhood confirms that investigators see geographic relevance that has not expired. And the questions surrounding the local management of the case, while separate from the federal forensic work, represent a real dimension of how this investigation is being experienced by the community it most directly affects. The hair in that laboratory carries information. The question is whether that information, once fully extracted and analyzed, identifies someone investigators can reach, locate, and hold accountable before more time passes than anyone wants to contemplate. The analysis is still running. The case is still open. And the answers, when they come, will come from a process that does not move faster than the science allows. That is where Day 75 leaves us.